Okay, so Jim, I have a question in your presentation and wanted to know if personhood for you boils down to ethics.
Boils down to
Ethics.
well, I wouldn't say it boils down solely to that. I tried to boil it down as much as possible. When I started this, I was going to say, I want to define what makes us human in one PowerPoint slide. Because oftentimes I read books in anthropology that said that one of the key ideas in anthropology is to, tell students what makes us human. And then you'd look through the whole book and it never gave the answer at the end. It would say all kinds of things about, we'd go through all the things like kinship and evolution or whatever, and never answer the question. So basically I wanted to answer that question. And that's where I am with it so far. So I think, ethics is part of it. And perhaps the why we evolved to think in those particular ways, which is quite different than a lot of other animals are capable of thinking. But once again, I want to say, those other animals, they're doing some amazing things out there. And I don't want to make it seem like we are completely separate from many of the issues that other animals face, and they may not have written ethics, but they oftentimes follow some of the very same guidelines. And I guess my comment to Vivian's talk would be that Vivianno, yeah, at the was the very first thing you said was everything that we said is in the Bible.
Oh.
And but your ending point was very similar. I agree. So overall, yes, and I think that was a key point. I think the key point that you were making at the end matches my key point. At the same time, most everything in between, I would like to point out that is outside of the realm of science. Okay, we can't test that stuff. And so when science and faith get together, I think there can be great outcomes. But we do have to keep in mind that the process is very different. And that there's a lot of things that could very well be true that science just can't test. And so in many ways we maybe offer, ideas that can limit ways of thinking or constrain thinking and say, okay, we know this a little bit, we know how this works now a little bit. And how does that, you can take that information or leave it. But I think the processes need to remain separate, but it's quite wonderful when the outcomes are very similar.
The biggest problem I had in preparing for this is precisely to speak how science plays into anything that I was doing. I have taught creationism, intelligent design, evolution, but I don't, and the differences between them and stuff. And as, a person who lives in this century, who's had at least some rudimentary science, I have no trouble accepting evolution as the best explanation we have. but that doesn't call into question my faith in God as creator. And that's why at the beginning I said I read texts in their historical and literary context. But if I were a creationist, or if there's a creationist out here, you are angry at everything I just said. But because from the kind of mentality behind creationism is that the Bible is factually accurate. And then they do all these mind-twisting things to try to get it reconciled with modern day science. And I have a problem with that. But and as you said, I think there's more. I love science. I'm not one of these, I hate science people. But I think that there is more to life than science can tell us about. And so I think that all of our forms of knowledge have limitations. And we just have to, I don't know how you scientifically prove love. You know, you might do all kinds of experiments and come to some general principles, but I just don't see how something like love or beauty, how do you scientifically prove beauty exists? And yet, it's in our world, and we respond to it, we see it. So, you know, if we think of science narrowly as what can be weighed, measured, tested, and reproduced under laboratory conditions, then things like love and beauty, they're just not going to cut it. And things like God are not going to cut it, because I don't know that God's ever showed up for a scientific experiment. So,
One of the interesting, I don't know if that, okay, so that I actually in an old paper a long time ago wrote this, a theological discussion about human uniqueness that takes science seriously needs to incorporate current scientific knowledge regarding evolution, cell biology, and genetics, and how they relate to human life experience. A layered approach is warranted where the data of science and the phenomena of our experience come together to comprehend humanness. And for me, then I go on and talk about Imago Dei, because this happens to be in a paper that I wrote about the Imago Dei, being made in the image of God. In my own research, I have utilized science, philosophy, and theology in looking at things such as personhood. I don't know if God's going to show up either, but I truly feel there's a sense of human uniqueness that comes in understanding that there's something greater than ourselves. God.
well, I would agree. I mean, I do think that theologians have a huge task ahead of them, because I think they have to rethink, particularly Christian theologians, that they have to rethink almost everything they have held in light of a modern understanding of the cosmos. And if you look in the history of understandings of God, it has always undergone profound changes when there's been a